The wind, a mournful dirge across the scorched plains, whipped Ilara's threadbare shawl about her swollen belly, a constant, chilling reminder of the desolation both within and without. Each step was an agony, her ankle swollen, her back a torment of fire, but the relentless rhythm of her flight pulsed stronger than the pain, onward, always onward. Dust, fine as milled flour, caked her face, tasted of ash and despair on her cracked lips. Before her, like a skeletal hand clawing at the bruised twilight sky, rose the remnants of what once might have been a home. Charred timbers, stark and accusing, were all that remained of the main house, its stone chimney a solitary, defiant sentinel against a backdrop of ruin. The air itself smelled of old grief, of dreams turned to cinders. This was it, the place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones back in the last miserable settlement she'd dared to pause, the Ashen Ranch, a name that now seemed a cruel mockery. Hope, a fragile ember she'd nursed across miles of unforgiving wilderness, threatened to be extinguished by the sheer totality of the destruction. She pressed a trembling hand to her womb, the life within a silent, insistent beat against her despair. She had come seeking refuge, a sliver of anonymity, but had found only a mirror to the devastation in her own heart. A flicker of movement near a listing, half-burnt outbuilding caught her eye. A man emerged, broad-shouldered and lean, moving with a quiet economy that spoke of familiarity with hardship. His face, shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, was unreadable, carved from the same unforgiving timber as the land itself. He carried an axe, its honed edge glinting dully, and his eyes, when they finally lifted to hers, were like chips of winter ice. He did not speak, made no gesture of welcome or warning. He simply watched, his stillness more unnerving than any shouted threat. This was Caleb, the ranch's sole inhabitant, a man who seemed as much a ruin as the landscape he occupied. Ilara swallowed, the dust grating in her throat. Words of pleading, of explanation, died before they could be formed. What could she say to a man who looked as though he had buried everything he ever loved in this very soil? The weight of the small, heavy purse hidden deep within her petticoats, the secret fortune that was both her salvation and her curse, felt like a brand against her skin. She had sought a place to disappear, but the silence of this man, the profound emptiness of this burnt land, threatened to swallow her whole. The sun bled out on the horizon, painting the charred spars of wood in hues of blood and violet, a beautiful, terrible end to a day that had brought her to the edge of endurance. She sank to her knees, not in supplication, but from sheer, bone-deep exhaustion, the vast, indifferent sky her only witness, save for the silent, watchful man who was now the arbiter of her fragile fate. His gaze lingered on her protruding belly, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before he turned, without a word, and disappeared back into the shadows of the ruined barn, leaving her alone with the ghosts and the encroaching night. The cold began to seep into her bones, a primal fear clutching at her heart, yet beneath it, a stubborn spark of defiance, the same spark that had driven her this far, refused to be entirely quenched. She would not break here, not at the very precipice of what she hoped might be a new, albeit shattered, beginning. She had to survive, for the child, for the faint, almost imperceptible possibility of a future wrested from the ashes. The dawn broke grey and reluctant, casting a pale, unforgiving light on the scene of utter devastation that was to be Ilara's sanctuary, or her grave. She had spent a fitful night huddled against the leeward side of a blackened stone wall, the wind her constant companion, her dreams filled with fractured images of pursuit and loss. With the first light, she saw him again. Caleb. He moved with a purpose that seemed oblivious to her presence, his focus entirely on some unseen task near the far edge of the property, the rhythmic thud of his axe a distant, almost hypnotic sound. He did not look her way. Hunger gnawed at Ilara, a dull ache that compounded her exhaustion. Her small store of provisions was nearly depleted. She knew she could not simply wait for charity that might never come. With a grunt of effort, she pushed herself to her feet, her body protesting every movement. Her gaze fell upon a patch of ground near the ruined farmhouse where a few stubborn weeds poked through the ash. Perhaps, she thought, a well lay nearby, or a spring. Water was the first necessity. She began to walk, slowly, deliberately, her eyes scanning the debris. She found a twisted, soot-covered bucket, miraculously intact save for a dented side. The well, when she finally located it behind what might have been a summer kitchen, was choked with debris, but a determined effort with a fallen branch cleared enough for her to see the dark gleam of water far below. The rope was gone, rotted or burned. Discouragement, cold and sharp, pricked at her. She sat on the well's crumbling stone lip, feeling the familiar sting of tears, but willed them back. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. Caleb's axe fell silent. She felt his presence before she saw him, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. He stood a few paces away, his expression still impassive, holding out a tin cup of water. He did not meet her eyes, merely extended the offering. She took it, her hand trembling slightly, murmuring a thank you that the wind seemed to snatch away. He gave a curt nod, then gestured towards a small, smouldering fire near the outbuilding he seemed to inhabit. A rabbit, skinned and spitted, turned slowly over the flames. He pointed to it, then to her, then made a simple eating gesture. It was an invitation, stark and unadorned, yet it felt like a lifeline. Later, as she gnawed on the surprisingly tender meat, the silence between them was thick, yet not entirely hostile. He sat on an upturned crate, sharpening his axe with methodical strokes, never looking directly at her, yet aware of her every movement. Ilara tried to speak, to explain her presence, but the words felt clumsy, inadequate. How did one explain a life in tatters to a man whose own life was so clearly marked by profound loss? Instead, she began to clear a small area near the ruined wall where she had slept, picking up charred pieces of wood, an unspoken intention to make this small patch her own. He watched her for a moment, then rose and retrieved a tattered but serviceable canvas sheet from his lean-to, offering it to her without comment. It wasn't kindness, not in the conventional sense, but it was acknowledgement. It was a shield against the coming night's chill. As the days bled into a week, a silent rhythm established itself. Ilara would attempt small tasks, clearing debris, searching for salvageable items, mending her worn clothes. Caleb would provide food, usually game he hunted, and water from a spring he knew deeper in the woods. Communication was sparse, a language of gestures, of necessity. She learned he was deaf not through words, but through observation, his complete lack of reaction to a sudden clap of thunder, the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, taking in information visually. She began to write small notes on scraps of charred paper she found, using a piece of charcoal, need more water, or simply, thank you. He would read them, his expression unchanging, then nod. She learned his name was Caleb from a faded inscription on a broken saddle in the barn. She wrote hers for him. Ilara. He traced the letters with a calloused finger, his lips moving silently, as if tasting the sound he could not hear. The baby within her grew, a constant, burgeoning presence, and with it, her determination. This ruin would not be her child's first home. She would build something, even if it was only a slightly better shelter against the elements. She had the means, hidden away, but she needed his strength, his skill. The thought of revealing her secret fortune to this silent, solitary man was terrifying. Trust was a fragile seed, and this ground was barren. Yet, she saw the way his hands, rough and powerful, handled his tools with an almost tender precision, the way his gaze would sometimes soften when it rested, unknowingly, on her rounded form. Perhaps, just perhaps, beneath the layers of ash and grief, something other than sorrow resided in Caleb's silent world. The first frost lay like a silver shroud over the blackened land, a stark reminder of the approaching winter. Ilara shivered, drawing the thin canvas Caleb had given her tighter. The small, cleared space by the ruined wall offered little protection against the biting wind. The baby was due in a matter of months, and the thought of giving birth in such exposed conditions filled her with a primal dread. She had to act. That morning, after Caleb had left to check his trap lines, Ilara retrieved the small, heavy purse from its hiding place. The gold coins within, each one a testament to a desperate act of reclamation from a man who had stolen her family's legacy and her father's life, felt cold and heavy in her palm. They were meant for a new beginning, not to be hoarded in fear. When Caleb returned, empty-handed and grim-faced from the scarcity of game, she was waiting for him by the sullen embers of their morning fire. She held out a single gold coin on her open palm. His eyes, usually fixed on some distant point, snapped to the coin, then to her face, a flicker of something unreadable, or suspicion, surprise? In their depths. She took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times. She pointed to the coin, then to herself, then made a sweeping gesture towards the ruined cabin, then mimed the act of building, stacking one imaginary log upon another. She then pointed to him, then to his axe, then to the distant trees. Finally, she laid the coin on a flat stone between them. He stared at the coin, then at her, his brow furrowed. He picked it up, tested its weight, his gaze intense. Ilara held her breath. This was the precipice. He could take the coin and leave her. He could react with anger, suspicion. Instead, he looked at the skeletal remains of the main house, then back at her, his eyes lingering for a moment on her belly. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Just one. But it was enough. It was an agreement. A partnership, forged in silence and shared desperation. The next day, the true labor began. Caleb, with a renewed, almost fierce energy, began felling trees from a hardy stand that had, by some miracle, escaped the fire's wrath. The sound of his axe, once a mournful beat, now echoed with purpose. Ilara, despite her advancing pregnancy, did what she could. She cleared brush, dragged smaller limbs, and learned to use a small handsaw Caleb unearthed from the barn to trim branches. He showed her, with patient gestures, how to notch logs, how to measure, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he guided hers. They worked from first light until dusk, fueled by a shared, unspoken goal. The walls of a small, sturdy cabin began to rise, log by painstaking log. Ilara used her carefully rationed coins to purchase supplies from a distant trading post Caleb reluctantly visited, nails, a few precious panes of glass for a small window, dried goods to supplement their meager diet. He never questioned her source of money beyond that first coin, a silent acknowledgement of her privacy, or perhaps, a shared understanding that some pasts were best left undisturbed. As the structure took shape, so too did a fragile trust between them. She learned a few basic signs he taught her: water, food, wood, good, danger. He, in turn, began to look for her small, written notes each morning. One evening, as a chill autumn rain drummed on their half-finished roof, Ilara found him staring into the fire, his face etched with a profound sorrow she had only glimpsed before. He slowly, hesitantly, began to sign, his movement stiff at first, then more fluid as the story unfolded. He signed fire, then a wife, then child, his hand making the sign for small. He touched his heart, then swept his hand towards the ashes of the main house. The meaning was devastatingly clear. His family had perished in the fire that destroyed his home, his life. Ilara felt a wave of empathy so profound it stole her breath. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. He didn't pull away. He simply sat there, the firelight flickering in his tear-filled eyes, the silence of his grief a palpable weight in the small, rough-hewn space that was slowly, against all odds, becoming a home. She understood then that they were both survivors, both haunted by flames, literal and metaphorical. The cabin, though modest, stood as a testament to their combined will, a small beacon of defiance against the encroaching winter. Snow had begun to dust the higher peaks, and the wind carried a sharper bite. Ilara, her movements now heavy and deliberate, busied herself organizing their small stores, while Caleb split the last of the logs for their winter stockpile. A fragile peace had settled over the Ashen Ranch, born of shared labor and unspoken understanding. But the frontier was a place where peace was often a fleeting illusion. One crisp afternoon, as Caleb was mending a harness in the barn and Ilara was kneading dough for their evening meal, a shadow fell across the cabin doorway. Ilara looked up, her heart lurching. Two men stood there, their clothes too fine for this rugged land, their faces etched with a city-bred arrogance. The larger of the two, a man with cold, assessing eyes and a cruel twist to his lips, smiled thinly. Well. Ilara Vance. Or should I say, Ilara Hayes? You've led us quite a chase, my dear. It was Silas Blackwood, her former employer, the man whose greed had driven her father to an early grave and whose thievery she had sought to rectify with her own desperate act. The man from whom she had taken the gold. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Ilara. She instinctively placed a hand over her belly. Blackwood's eyes flickered down to her swollen form, his smile widening. "And carrying a little dividend, I see." How enterprising! His companion, a burly man with dull, brutish features, chuckled. "We've come for what's ours, Ilara," Blackwood continued, his voice soft, menacing. "The company's funds you so creatively relocated." Ilara stood her ground, her voice trembling only slightly. "That money was stolen from my father." "It was restitution for a life you destroyed," Blackwood sneered. "A sentimental notion. But sentiment doesn't fill ledgers, my dear. Now, be a good girl and tell us where you've hidden it." Just then, Caleb emerged from the barn, sensing the shift in atmosphere, his eyes immediately assessing the threat. He moved to stand slightly in front of Ilara, his stance protective, his gaze fixed on Blackwood. Blackwood looked Caleb up and down with disdain. "And who is this? Your rustic protector? Can he even understand what I'm saying?" He made a mocking gesture towards his ears. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched into fists. Ilara quickly signed to Caleb, "Danger. Bad men. Want gold?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. He understood. Blackwood, misinterpreting Caleb's silence as incomprehension or cowardice, stepped forward. "Move aside, plowboy. This doesn't concern you." Caleb didn't budge. The burly companion moved to shove him, but Caleb, with surprising speed and strength, caught the man's arm, twisting it sharply. The man howled in pain. Blackwood's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then rage. "So, the deaf-mute has some fight in him after all. Perhaps we'll have to be less polite." He drew a pistol from beneath his coat. "The gold, Ilara. Now. Or your protector, and then you will suffer." Panic seized Ilara, but looking at Caleb's resolute face, a surge of courage flowed through her. This was her home now, her future. She would not let this man destroy it as he had destroyed her past. The full weight of her actions, the desperate gamble she had taken, crystallized in this moment. She had taken the gold not just for herself, but to right a terrible wrong, to honor her father's memory, to ensure that Blackwood's corruption did not go unanswered. It was a truth she had buried deep, but now, facing him, it felt like her only shield. "The gold is for my child," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's the only legacy my father has left, thanks to you." Blackwood's face contorted with fury. "Enough of this." He raised the pistol. But Caleb was already moving. He lunged, not at Blackwood, but at the heavy water barrel near the cabin door, sending it crashing towards the armed man. Water and splintered wood flew. Blackwood stumbled, his shot going wild, the bullet thudding into a cabin log. The burly man, recovering, charged at Caleb, but Caleb met him with a ferocity born of a protector's rage, his powerful fists finding their mark. The fight was brutal, desperate. Ilara, her mind racing, grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth. As Blackwood regained his footing, aiming his pistol again, she swung the poker with all her might, striking his gun arm. The pistol clattered to the floor. Caleb, having subdued the other man, turned his attention to Blackwood, his face a mask of cold fury. Blackwood, disarmed and facing Caleb's silent, implacable wrath, finally saw the true strength he had underestimated. Fear flashed in his eyes. He backed away, his arrogance shattered. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. He and his groaning companion scrambled away, disappearing back into the wilderness as quickly as they had come, leaving behind only the lingering scent of their malice and the echo of their threats. Ilara rushed to Caleb's side. He had a cut above his eye, and his knuckles were bruised, but he was standing, his chest heaving. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. She signed, "They are gone." "We are safe then," she added. "Thank you." He simply nodded, then gently took the poker from her trembling hand, his gaze softening as he looked at her, then at the cabin, their shared sanctuary, defended and preserved. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation left a palpable tension in the air, the silence of the wilderness now charged with the memory of violence. Ilara tended to Caleb's minor wounds, her touch gentle, her heart still pounding from the ordeal. He accepted her care with his usual stoicism, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a new depth of understanding, a shared knowledge of the precipice they had faced together. The threat from Blackwood, though repelled, lingered like a shadow. They knew he might return, or send others. For several days, Caleb was even more vigilant than usual, his gaze constantly sweeping the tree line, his axe never far from his hand. Elara, too, felt a heightened awareness, a primal instinct to protect the life within her and the fragile peace they had fought to preserve. Yet, as the days passed without further incident, a sense of weary relief began to settle. The shared danger had forged an even stronger bond between them, an unspoken commitment that transcended words or signs. They had defended their home, their nascent family, together. The first heavy snows of winter arrived, blanketing the Ashen Ranch in a thick, pristine white, transforming the scarred landscape into a place of stark beauty and profound quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath. It was during one such silent, snow-filled night, with a blizzard raging outside, that Elara's labor began. The pains came swiftly, intensely, and Caleb, despite his initial alarm, rose to the occasion with a quiet competence that amazed her. He kept the fire stoked, brought her warm water, his large hands surprisingly deft as he followed the few, urgent instructions she managed to gasp out or scrawl on a piece of slate. In the heart of the storm, surrounded by the wild, untamed wilderness, with only a deaf lumberjack as her midwife, Elara brought her child into the world. A healthy baby boy, his cry a raw, vigorous sound that cut through the howl of the wind, a declaration of life in the face of desolation. Caleb, holding the tiny, swaddled infant for the first time, looked down at the small, perfect face, and a transformation occurred. The years of grief, the stoic mask he had worn for so long, seemed to melt away, replaced by an expression of such profound tenderness, of awe, that it brought tears to Elara's eyes. He looked at her, then at the baby, and a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes, crinkling their corners. In that moment, the last vestiges of their isolation, their individual sorrows, seemed to dissipate. They were no longer just two survivors clinging to the wreckage of their pasts, they were a family, forged in hardship, bound by love and the miracle of new life. The child, whom Elara named Daniel, meaning God is my judge, became the center of their world. He was the innocent catalyst that completed their healing. Caleb, who had lost his own child in the fire, found a renewed purpose in caring for Daniel, his grief slowly giving way to a quiet joy. He would spend hours simply watching the baby sleep, or carrying him carefully around the cabin, his large hands incredibly gentle. He even began to carve small wooden animals for the boy, his skill with a knife as precise and artful as it was with an axe. The fortune, Elara's secret burden, was now openly discussed, not in terms of its shadowed origins, but as a means to build a future for Daniel. They used it sparingly, wisely, to improve the cabin, to buy a milk cow, to acquire seeds for a spring garden. The ranch, once a symbol of ruin, began to bloom. The charred timbers were cleared, replaced by new fences. A small vegetable patch flourished where only ash had been. The sound of Caleb's axe still echoed, but now it was often accompanied by Elara's quiet singing as she worked, or the happy gurgles of their son. The silence of Caleb's world was no longer a barrier, but a space filled with a different kind of communication, of shared glances, knowing smiles, and the deep, unwavering language of the heart. Spring arrived, painting the land in vibrant greens and wildflowers. The Ashen Ranch was no longer a place of ghosts and sorrow, but of life, resilience, and quiet triumph. Elara, watching Caleb teach young Daniel his first sign, the sign for love, felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had come to this burnt place, a pregnant, outcast maid with a secret fortune, seeking only survival. She had found so much more: a home, a protector, a love that had redeemed them both, and a future brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. They had rebuilt more than just a ranch, they had rebuilt their lives, from the ashes, unbroken. What trials must one endure to find true sanctuary? Perhaps the deepest wounds pave the way for the strongest foundations, and the quietest hearts hold the capacity for the greatest love. The frontier asked much of those who dared to tame it, but for those who persevered, who faced their ghosts and fought for their dreams, it offered the ultimate reward, a life of purpose, hard-won and deeply cherished.